At her father's deathbed in a hospital room that still smelled of antiseptic and prayer, they laughed. Patricia Whitmore adjusted the flowers, as if arranging decor for a luncheon, and said loudly enough for the nurse to hear, "At least there's nothing to fight over. Some men leave legacies, others leave bills." Vanessa smirked. Ronald said nothing. Tracy Gordon stood beside her father, fingers folded, eyes steady. She did not argue. She did not cry. They mistook her silence for emptiness. They did not know that documents had already been signed, sealed, and placed where their hands would never reach. If you believe dignity is stronger than noise, stay with this story until the very end. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from and your local time. And if you value quiet strength and lawful justice, consider subscribing. Some stories deserve witnesses. Tracy Gordon had learned long before she married Ronald Whitmore that silence could be a form of architecture. It could hold weight. It could redirect pressure. It could prevent collapse. The Whitmore house stood on a quiet street in Westchester County, New York. White columns, symmetrical windows, a flag that was replaced at the first sign of wear. It was the kind of house that suggested order and permanence. Patricia Whitmore liked it that way. She liked most things that way. From the outside, Tracy fit the picture. Neat dresses, measured smile hands, folded politely during neighborhood gatherings. She remembered names. She brought the correct bottle of wine. She thanked hosts twice. Inside the house, the atmosphere shifted in ways that would have been invisible to a guest. Ronald Whitmore worked in corporate finance for a regional investment firm. He spoke in controlled tones even when irritated, especially when irritated. In public, he introduced Tracy as my wife, Tracy Gordon, with a faint emphasis on her maiden name, as if it were a quaint artifact. At home, the name Gordon was rarely spoken. Patricia preferred phrases like, "in this family," or "the Whitmores have always." Vanessa Whitmore visited often. She was older than Ronald by 3 years, divorced once, and openly proud of having married well the second time. She had a talent for comments that sounded harmless until they settled into the air and revealed their edges. Tracy Vanessa had said one evening over dinner, tilting her head as if genuinely curious, "Did your father ever invest, or was he more of a paycheck-to-paycheck type?" Patricia did not look up from her plate. Ronald sipped his wine. Tracy had answered evenly. He worked in logistics. It was true. It was also incomplete. The room had gone quiet for a beat too long, the kind of quiet that carried judgment rather than discomfort. Later that night, when Tracy cleared the dishes alone, she wrote the date in a small navy notebook she kept in the back of her dresser drawer. May 14th. Dinner. Paycheck-to-paycheck type. Witnesses PVR. She did not write to build a case. She wrote because clarity steadied her. Money in the Whitmore household was both omnipresent and carefully controlled. Ronald insisted it was practical for Patricia to oversee certain joint accounts until Tracy felt more comfortable. Tracy had once worked in administrative operations at a mid-sized distribution company before moving after the wedding. Her job search in Westchester had been slow, then quietly discouraged. "There's no rush," Ronald had told her. "My income covers everything." Covers everything meant he transferred a fixed monthly amount into their shared checking account. Larger financial decisions remained under his management. Patricia often referenced investment strategies at the dinner table, glancing toward Tracy as though explaining weather patterns to someone without windows. When Tracy asked for access to certain statements casually over coffee one morning, Ronald's smile had thinned almost imperceptibly. "Of course," he'd said. "It's just complicated. I don't want you overwhelmed." She had nodded. That night, she wrote June 3rd, asked for full access to brokerage summary. Response complicated. Patterns mattered more than incidents. It wasn't cruelty in the dramatic sense. There were no slammed doors, no shouted insults. There were adjustments, revisions, decisions made for her benefit. When guests came, Ronald pulled her chair out. Patricia praised her cooking. Vanessa complimented her dress. When guests left, the tone shifted back to calibration. You don't have to agree with everything Patricia had said once, folding linen napkins with precise fingers. But it's important you understand how things are done here. Here. The word functioned like a border. Tracy had grown up in Ohio, in a house smaller than the Witmores' kitchen. Her father, Edward Gordon, had been gone often work trips, conferences, unexplained absences that left more questions than explanations. He was not affectionate in the conventional sense. He paid tuition on time. He sent books. He missed birthdays. Patricia had once asked in front of two neighbors during a charity luncheon, "Is your father retired now, or still trying to find his footing?" The women had laughed, lightly uncertain. Tracy had felt the familiar tightening in her chest, not shame exactly, more like anticipation. She had answered, "He's still working." Another entry in the Navy notebook. September 21st, luncheon. Find his footing. What the Witmores mistook for passivity was in fact observation. Tracy noticed how Ronald shifted topics when finances approached certain figures. She noticed how Patricia referred to family trusts in the plural, but never specified details. She noticed how Vanessa's curiosity sharpened whenever inheritance stories appeared in the news. And she noticed something else. Ronald had begun encouraging her to sign small documents without much explanation. An updated credit card authorization. A secondary signature on a home equity line, just in case. A consent form allowing him broader discretion over certain joint holdings. Routine, he'd say. Everyone does it. She never refused outright. She asked for copies. Sometimes he delayed providing them. Sometimes he forgot. She began scanning everything. Late at night, after the house settled into silence, Tracy would sit at the small desk in the guest room, the only space that felt partially hers, and review statements. Not because she suspected a crime, because she sensed imbalance. There were transfers she did not recognize. Consulting fees to firms she had never heard of. Minor at first, then incrementally larger. When she asked, Ronald answered with mild irritation. "It's portfolio restructuring. You wouldn't understand the mechanics." She did not challenge him. Instead, she documented dates, amounts, explanations. The first time Patricia referred to Tracy as lucky, it had been delivered with a smile. "You're fortunate," she'd said. "Not every girl lands in a family that can carry her." Carry her. The phrase lingered longer than the others. That night, Tracy did not cry. She opened her notebook. October 2nd. Not lucky. Carry her. Silence, she understood, was not surrender. It was space. Space in which other people revealed themselves. Ronald had once told her early in their marriage, "Transparency builds trust." He had meant it as reassurance. She had taken it as instruction, so she became transparent in her own way, not by speaking, but by keeping record of everything she saw. When news came that Edward Gordon had been admitted to a private hospital in Manhattan, the Witmore dining room had gone still for a different reason. Patricia's fork paused midair. "Oh," she'd said. "Is it serious?" Tracy had nodded. "They think so." Vanessa's expression shifted not to sympathy, but to calculation so brief it might have been imagined. Ronald cleared his throat. "Do you need to go into the city?" "Yes." There had been a silence then, not mocking, not dismissive. Evaluative. "Of course," Patricia said finally. "Family is important." The words were correct. The tone was not. That evening, as Tracy packed a small overnight bag, she felt something unfamiliar. Not fear, not grief yet. Something like alignment. She did not know the full truth about her father's affairs. She did not know what documents existed beyond her sight. But she knew this. The Witmores believed they understood her circumstances completely. They believed she came from nothing substantial. They believed silence meant dependency. Tracy zipped the bag carefully and placed her Navy notebook inside. Outside the Witmore house remained immaculate columns, steady windows, polished flag, unwrinkled in the autumn air. Inside, beneath the surface of routine and restraint, quiet ledgers were forming. And Tracy Gordon, who had been observed for years, was beginning to observe back with purpose. Edward Gordon had never explained himself in ways that satisfied anyone. He had explained in results. Tracy learned that distinction early in life. When she was 8, he missed her school recital and mailed a book on supply chains with a note tucked inside. Understand how things move, and you'll understand who controls them. At 12, he forgot her birthday, but wired money into a college fund that would later cover tuition without loans. At 17, he attended a parent-teacher conference and said almost nothing yet, somehow secured a summer internship for her with a logistics firm that most seniors could not access. He was present in structure, absent in sentiment. The Witmores never asked for nuance. To them, Edward Gordon was a man who had failed to provide visible comfort, no holiday homes, no society page mentions, no public philanthropy under his daughter's name. In their hierarchy of success, visibility mattered. What they did not know was that Edward preferred invisibility by design. He had built his career in international freight and infrastructure shipping corridors, port investments, warehousing networks that quietly underpinned more glamorous industries. His name rarely appeared in headlines. His companies appeared even less. When Tracy called the Manhattan hospital to confirm visiting hours, the nurse's tone shifted upon hearing her last name. "Yes, Miss Gordon," the nurse said. "We've been expecting you." Tracy noticed the phrasing. "We've been expecting you." At the Witmore dining table that evening, Patricia folded her napkin with care. So she said, "How long do you think you'll be gone?" "I don't know," Tracy replied. Ronald's jaw tightened slightly. "I have meetings this week." "I'll manage transportation," Tracy said. "You don't need to drive me." The offer had not been about convenience. It had been about control. Ronald studied her face, as if recalibrating something. "You shouldn't travel alone if you're emotional," he said. "I'm not emotional." It was not defiance. It was fact. Vanessa leaned back in her chair. "Well," she said lightly, "if there were assets to discuss, I'm sure your father would have mentioned them by now." The comment landed softly, intentionally. Tracy met her eyes for one measured second before lowering her gaze. "I'm going to see him," she said. Later in the guest room, she opened her Navy notebook. November 3rd, dinner, assets to discuss. She did not add commentary. Facts were enough. What Tracy did not know, though the narrator did, was that Edward Gordon had anticipated this exact dynamic years earlier. When Tracy married into the Witmore family, Edward had commissioned a discreet background assessment, not out of suspicion, but out of habit. He believed in supply chains and incentives. He believed in understanding how people moved when resources shifted. The report had not revealed criminal behavior. It had revealed appetite. Ronald Witmore carried substantial personal debt masked by structured refinancing. Patricia Witmore had leveraged family assets aggressively during market highs and quietly consolidated losses into subsidiaries. Vanessa's second marriage had improved her social position, but not her liquidity. They were not reckless. They were acquisitive. Edward had recognized the pattern immediately. He had called attorney Melissa Carter the same week. "I want it layered," he had said. "Multiple barriers, and no early disclosures." Melissa Carter had listened without interruption. She specialized in high-value estate structuring trusts, designed less for tax avoidance and more for insulation. "You're protecting her from someone specific?" she asked. "I'm protecting her from incentives," Edward replied. Back in Westchester, Tracy closed her suitcase and walked through the Witmore hallway one last time before leaving for Manhattan. Patricia stood near the staircase, arms folded. "Call, if anything significant happens," she said. The pause before significant was almost imperceptible. Ronald offered to accompany her to the train station. She declined again. On the platform, wind cutting through her coat, Tracy felt something settle inside her. For years, she had moved within the Witmore household like someone navigating borrowed space. Now, stepping onto the train alone, she felt ownership over at least one decision. In Manhattan, the hospital rose in glass and steel, understated but unmistakably expensive. The lobby floors reflected light and clean lines. A receptionist directed her upstairs without asking for identification. "We've been informed," the receptionist said. Again informed. Edward's hospital room overlooked the East River. Machines hummed softly around him. His frame, once rigid and imposing, had thinned. Tracy stood at the doorway for a moment before approaching. He opened his eyes before she spoke. "You came," he said. "Yes." His voice was weaker than she expected, but steady. There were questions she had rehearsed over the years. Why he had missed recitals. Why he had never visited Westchester. Why he had never asked about Ronald. She did not ask them. Instead, she took his hand. "You look tired," she said. He almost smiled. "That's accurate." There was a pause, not awkward, not strained, just unfinished. "I tried to—" He began, then stopped. The effort cost him. She could see it. "Tried to," what she asked, softly. "Protect," he finished. The word lingered between them, from what he did not specify. A knock interrupted the moment. Ronald entered first, followed by Patricia and Vanessa, their expressions arranged into polite concern. "Oh," Patricia said brightly. "Mr. Gordon." Edward's gaze shifted toward them. It did not soften. Ronald stepped forward, offering a handshake Edward did not take. "We wanted to pay our respects," Ronald said. The phrasing suggested something already concluded. Vanessa's eyes scanned the room equipment view furnishings cataloging value. Tracy noticed. Edward noticed. What none of them realized was that Melissa Carter stood in the hallway outside, having arrived earlier for a scheduled visit. She did not enter. She listened. Inside the room, conversation turned clinical. Patricia inquired about prognosis with the detached curiosity of someone assessing property damage. Ronald asked about long-term arrangements. Vanessa offered comments about keeping things simple. Tracy remained beside the bed. Edward's fingers tightened faintly around hers. His eyes returned to her, and for a brief second, the noise of the room receded. "I structured it," he whispered. She leaned closer. "What?" He exhaled slowly. "You'll understand soon." The Witmores did not hear. They were discussing logistics. Outside, Melissa Carter made a quiet note in her phone. Documentation mattered. Incentives revealed character faster than adversity. As visiting hours ended, a nurse asked non-family members to step out. Ronald hesitated before complying. Patricia adjusted her coat. Vanessa checked her phone. Tracy did not move. "I'll stay," she said. No one challenged her. After they left, the room grew quiet again. Edward's breathing steadied. "You don't owe anyone explanations," he murmured. She did not respond immediately. "I know," she said finally. What she did not yet know was how literal his statement would become. In Westchester, the Whitmore house prepared for contingency. Patricia made calls under the guise of sympathy. Ronald reviewed spreadsheets late into the night. Vanessa speculated privately about estate tax thresholds. They operated on assumptions. They assumed proximity meant entitlement. They assumed silence meant ignorance. They assumed Edward Gordon's absence from their social sphere equated to financial insignificance. On a side table in the Manhattan hospital room, a leather portfolio rested unopened. Inside were copies of documents dated years earlier, irrevocable, insulated, precise. Edward Gordon had never explained himself in ways that satisfied anyone. He explained in outcomes. And outcomes, unlike impressions, did not require conversation. Tracy sat beside his bed as the city lights flickered across the river outside. She did not know the full architecture yet, but she sensed it was already built. The hospital moved according to quiet systems elevators that required coded badges after certain hours, nurses who charted without looking up, doors that sealed softly behind departing visitors. Tracy began to recognize the rhythm by her second night. Edward Gordon's room remained private, positioned at the end of a corridor where foot traffic thinned. Outside the large window, the East River carried slow bands of reflected light. Inside, machines tracked the diminishing certainty of breath. At 8:10 a.m., a woman in a charcoal suit appeared at the doorway. She did not knock immediately. She observed first. Melissa Carter had built a reputation on discretion. Mid-40s, composed eyes that missed very little. Her firm specialized in complex estate structures, layered trusts, asset partitions, contingency triggers designed to activate under specific conditions. She had visited Edward twice in the past month. Now she stepped inside. "Miss Gordon," she said gently. Tracy rose from the chair beside the bed. "Yes, I'm Melissa Carter. I've been working with your father." The sentence was simple. The implications were not. Edward opened his eyes at the sound of her voice. He gave the faintest nod. Tracy studied the woman carefully. Melissa's presence carried no urgency, no visible grief, only preparedness. "Is this a good time?" Melissa asked. Edward shifted slightly. "Brief," he murmured. Melissa approached the bed but kept a respectful distance. "I'll speak generally," she said. "Details can wait." Tracy felt the room tilt not from shock, but from anticipation. Her father had whispered about protection. Now the architecture began to take shape. "There are documents in place," Melissa continued. "They've been active for some time. Documents." Tracy repeated, her voice steady. "Yes, structures designed to ensure continuity and insulation." Insulation. Edward's fingers moved faintly against the hospital sheet as if confirming the word. Tracy did not ask about numbers. She did not ask about control. She asked only one question. Is everything lawful? Melissa's gaze held hers. Entirely. The answer mattered more than any valuation. A soft knock interrupted them. Ronald entered first, his expression measured but alert. Behind him, Patricia Whitmore wore a navy coat tailored to precision. Vanessa followed, phone already in hand. Melissa stepped back but did not leave. "Oh," Patricia said lightly, noticing the unfamiliar woman. "And you are Melissa Carter," she replied. "I represent Mr. Gordon." Patricia's smile widened by a fraction. "Of course. Well, we wouldn't want to overwhelm him." The comment carried implication that legal counsel itself was excessive. Melissa remained still. "I'll keep it concise." Ronald approached the bed, lowering his voice into something resembling concern. "Sir," he said, "we're all hoping for clarity on arrangements." The word lingered in the sterile air. Tracy noticed how quickly the conversation had pivoted from health to logistics. Edward's eyes moved from Ronald to Patricia, then to Vanessa. There was no hostility in his expression, only evaluation. "Arrangements," he repeated quietly. Patricia stepped forward. "It's just that Tracy shouldn't be burdened with complications. We're family." The sentence sounded generous. It was not. Melissa spoke before Tracy could respond. "Everything is structured to minimize burden," she said. That was Mr. Gordon's priority. Ronald's gaze sharpened. Structured how Edward's breathing deepened slightly, a signal of fatigue. Tracy placed her hand over his. "Not now," she said calmly. The authority in her tone surprised even her. Vanessa exchanged a glance with Patricia, quick, almost imperceptible. Melissa checked her watch. "We can schedule a formal discussion at the appropriate time." Ronald nodded, though reluctance edged the movement. "Yes, of course." They stayed another 10 minutes. During that time, Patricia adjusted flowers that did not need adjusting. Vanessa stood near the window, scanning the skyline. Ronald asked questions phrased as support, but angled toward information. Melissa did not elaborate. When visiting hours ended, hospital staff gently ushered non-immediate family members toward the door. Ronald hesitated again. "I'll stay tonight," Tracy said. Patricia blinked. "That's unnecessary." "I'll stay," Tracy repeated. There was no argument. Not yet. After they left, Melissa remained behind. "Your father anticipated pressure," she said quietly. Tracy did not pretend confusion. "From my husband. From circumstances," Melissa corrected. "Pressure often follows perceived access." Tracy absorbed the phrasing carefully. "There will be a formal reading," Melissa continued, "but I advise discretion until then." "Discretion has never been difficult for me," Tracy replied. Melissa allowed herself the faintest acknowledgement of understanding. On the other side of Manhattan, in the Whitmore house, the atmosphere shifted from sympathy to calculation. Patricia sat at the dining table with a legal pad. Vanessa poured wine. "He wouldn't have brought a lawyer unless there's something significant," Vanessa said. Ronald paced near the window. Significant doesn't mean liquid, he replied. It could be debt, liability, complex holdings. Patricia tapped her pen thoughtfully. Still, she said, we need clarity. Ronald stopped pacing. We'll have it. Back in the hospital room, Tracy watched the steady decline of daylight across the river. Edward stirred. She's careful, he murmured. Melissa, Tracy asked. He nodded faintly. You chose well, she said. A pause. I chose late, he replied. The admission hung in the room. Tracy did not press him. Regret served no present function. Near midnight, her phone vibrated. Ronald. She stepped into the hallway to answer. How is he? Ronald asked. Weak. A pause. And the lawyer. She was here. What did she say, that there are documents? Silence expanded on the other end. What kind of documents, he asked. She didn't specify. Another pause, longer this time. You should include me in these discussions, Ronald said finally. As your husband? Tracy leaned against the wall, gaze steady. When there's something to include you in, she replied. The phrasing unsettled him. You're being distant, he said. No, she answered softly. I'm being precise. She ended the call before the conversation could bend. Inside the room, Edward's breathing grew more uneven. Tracy returned to her chair. In the early hours of morning, machines altered their rhythm. Nurses entered. Doctors followed. There were procedures. There were attempts. At 4:17 a.m., Edward Gordon's heartbeat flattened into a single sustained line. Tracy did not collapse. She did not wail. She placed her hand on his and whispered, I understand. In Westchester, Ronald's phone rang at 4:32 a.m. By noon, Patricia had arranged condolences with efficiency. Vanessa posted a carefully worded message online. By evening, inquiries began. When is the reading? Vanessa asked over speakerphone. Soon, Ronald replied. I'll handle it. They believed proximity granted influence. They did not account for structure. 2 days later, Melissa Carter sent a formal notice to Tracy Gordon's private email address. Subject line, Estate Proceedings Initial Conference. It included a date, a time, a location at Carter & Associates in Midtown Manhattan. No additional names were listed. Tracy read the message once. Then again, she forwarded nothing. In the Witmore house, Ronald noticed her quietness sharpen. What did the lawyer send, he asked casually that evening. A meeting, she replied. For whom? For me. Patricia looked up from her teacup. As your husband Ronald should attend. Tracy met her gaze. It didn't specify that. Silence fell, not hostile, not yet, but strained. Vanessa's voice cut in. You wouldn't want to appear ungrateful. The accusation was subtle. I'm not, Tracy said. She excused herself and returned to the guest room. Inside the Navy notebook, she wrote November 8th. Should attend. Appear ungrateful. Patterns were converging. Outside, the Witmore house remained immaculate. Inside, tension tightened like a wire drawn too far. In Manhattan, in a secure filing cabinet 3 floors above street level, documents waited signed years earlier, immune to persuasion. The architecture Edward Gordon had built did not depend on argument. It depended on activation. And activation was approaching. Grief did not arrive in waves for Tracy Gordon. It arrived in procedures. There were certificates to sign, personal effects to collect. A hospital administrator who spoke in gentle tones while sliding forms across a polished desk. Edward Gordon's belongings fit into a single leather bag. A watch, a slim wallet, a folded pair of reading glasses, and a portfolio sealed with a discreet brass clasp. Melissa Carter accepted the portfolio without opening it. Everything inside is duplicated, she said quietly. The originals are secured. Tracy nodded. In the hallway outside the hospital chapel, Patricia Witmore stood with her coat draped over one arm. Her posture straight, as if attending a board meeting rather than standing in the wake of a death. It's unfortunate, she said, voice low but not softened. Though at least these matters can now be settled. Vanessa adjusted her scarf. Closure is important. Ronald watched Tracy carefully, as if waiting for some visible fracture. None came. The chapel service was small. Edward had not cultivated a large public circle. A few former colleagues attended their suits, understated their condolences, brief but sincere. One of them, a gray-haired man with steady eyes, held Tracy's hand a moment longer than expected. "Your father built carefully," he said. The statement sounded like tribute. It was also information. After the service, as people filtered toward the exit, Patricia stepped closer to Tracy. "We should all go to dinner," she suggested. "Family unity matters at times like this." Tracy looked at her for a long moment. "Tonight, I'd prefer quiet." Patricia's smile held, but only just. "Of course." Outside the chapel doors, Vanessa leaned toward Ronald. "There can't be much," she whispered, not quietly enough. "If there were, we would have known." Ronald did not respond. His gaze remained fixed on Tracy, calculating. Later that afternoon, in Edward's hospital room, now emptied of machines, the atmosphere felt stripped of pretense. Melissa Carter stood by the window. Daniel Brooks, a representative from a private trust company, had joined her. He was in his early 50s, composed, carrying a slim briefcase. Before the formal conference, Melissa said there are procedural acknowledgments. Tracy took a seat at the small table near the window. Daniel opened his briefcase and placed several documents in front of her. Titles appeared in precise legal font: irrevocable trust agreement, asset holding structure, successor trustee activation. Tracy did not rush. She read headings first, then paragraphs. Ronald, who had insisted on accompanying her under the justification of support, shifted impatiently. "This seems excessive," he said. "Can we summarize?" Melissa did not look up. "Summaries create gaps. We prefer clarity." Patricia folded her hands. "Surely the broad outline is simple." "It is," Daniel replied calmly. "Mr. Gordon established a multi-tiered trust approximately 8 years ago. It has been active and accumulating since that time." "Accumulating what?" Vanessa asked. Daniel met her gaze evenly. "Assets." The word hung there. Ronald leaned forward. "What kind of assets?" Melissa answered this time. "Diversified holdings, equity positions, infrastructure investments, private funds, international real estate interests." Patricia's composure thinned slightly. "And the value," she pressed. Melissa turned to Tracy. "That figure is reserved for the formal conference," she said. "But it is substantial." Vanessa let out a small, incredulous laugh. "Substantial is subjective." Daniel slid a single-page summary across the table toward Tracy. "This is a preliminary snapshot," he said. Ronald's eyes darted to the page. Tracy read silently. The number was positioned in the lower right corner, aligned with disciplined restraint. $14, $287,000,000, $14.287 billion. There was no dramatic intake of breath, no widening of eyes. Tracy read it again to ensure accuracy. Then she placed the page flat on the table. Ronald's hand moved instinctively toward it. Melissa's palm rested gently over the document before he could reach it. "This copy is for Miss Gordon," she said. Silence settled like dust after impact. Vanessa blinked twice. Patricia's jaw tightened. "That can't be correct," Ronald said finally. "It is," Daniel replied. Patricia recovered first. "Well," she said carefully, "naturally, these matters must be managed responsibly. Tracy has always had guidance." The implication was immediate. Ronald found his voice again. "As her husband, I assume I'll be involved in oversight." Melissa's tone remained even. "The trust includes protective provisions." "What does that mean?" Vanessa demanded. "It means," Melissa said, "that control and distribution are governed exclusively by the terms Mr. Gordon established." Ronald leaned back in his chair. "And those terms are?" Melissa looked directly at Tracy. "Miss Gordon is the sole primary beneficiary. She is not required to transfer, co-manage, or disclose internal trust operations to any third party, including a spouse." The word spouse landed with surgical precision. Patricia's fingers tightened around her handbag. "That's unconventional," she said. "It is protective," Daniel corrected. Ronald's expression shifted not to anger yet, but to recalibration. "Tracy," he said, voice softer now, We'll need to discuss this privately. Tracy met his gaze without flinching. There's nothing to discuss yet. The calmness unsettled him more than outrage would have. Vanessa stood abruptly. $14 billion, she repeated under her breath, as if testing the sound. Melissa gathered the documents neatly. The formal reading will occur in 3 days at our Midtown office. Attendance will be limited to Miss Gordon unless she invites others. Patricia's voice sharpened. You're suggesting she exclude her own husband. I'm suggesting. Melissa replied that she followed the structure her father created. The room cooled. Outside traffic moved along the river as it always had. Inside, the Witmore family's assumptions fractured quietly. On the drive back to Westchester, silence dominated the car. Ronald gripped the steering wheel too tightly. This changes things, he said finally. It clarifies things, Tracy replied. Patricia exhaled sharply from the back seat. We must be practical. Vanessa leaned forward. You can't possibly handle this alone. Tracy watched the road ahead. I won't be alone, she said. It was not defiance. It was statement. That evening in the Witmore dining room, conversation shifted in tone. Patricia poured wine for Tracy without comment. Vanessa asked about preferred investment philosophies. Ronald spoke about joint future planning. The atmosphere had transformed from condescension to strategic politeness. Tracy noticed every alteration. In the guest room later, she opened her Navy notebook. November 10th, $14.287 billion. Reaction recalibration immediate. She paused before adding one final line. Protection confirmed. Downstairs, Ronald made phone calls behind closed doors. Patricia researched estate law. Vanessa drafted hypothetical philanthropic initiatives that included her name so prominently. None of them recognized the most critical element. The trust was not new. It had existed for years. Edward Gordon had anticipated appetite. He had built insulation accordingly. And Tracy Gordon, who had once been treated as someone carried by circumstance, now stood at the center of a structure designed entirely for her autonomy. The power shift did not roar. It settled quiet, immovable, lawful. And the Witmores, who had laughed at a hospital bedside, were only beginning to understand what they had misjudged. The Witmore house did not erupt after the number was revealed. It reorganized. Patricia moved through the kitchen the next morning, with controlled efficiency issuing instructions to the housekeeper in a tone too steady to be natural. Vanessa arrived before noon, with pastries no one touched. Ronald worked from home, though he took no visible calls in the open. Tracy noticed how quickly language shifted. No one said your father anymore. They said the trust. They said the structure. They said the future. At breakfast, Patricia placed a porcelain cup in front of Tracy with unusual gentleness. We've been thinking, she began. Tracy waited. A fortune of that magnitude requires experienced oversight. Patricia continued. Families like ours understand these complexities. Families like ours. The phrase attempted inclusion while reinforcing hierarchy. The trustees are experienced, Tracy said calmly. Ronald set his fork down. Trustees answer to beneficiaries. Yes, Tracy replied. And beneficiaries consult their spouses, he added. She met his gaze. When consultation is required. Vanessa exhaled softly, as if disappointed by a stubborn child. You don't want to appear secretive, she said. Tracy took a sip of coffee. Transparency, she said evenly, is defined by terms, not pressure. Ronald studied her, as if reassessing a balance sheet that no longer aligned. The formal conference at Carter & Associates was scheduled for Thursday at 10 a.m. Melissa Carter had reiterated that attendance would be limited to Tracy unless she expressly requested otherwise. Ronald had asked 3 separate times to accompany her. Each time, Tracy gave the same answer. I'll attend alone. By Wednesday evening, the Witmore house felt narrower, though its walls had not moved. Patricia began offering strategic suggestions under the guise of mentorship. You'll need a philanthropic direction, she said while organizing mail. It's how reputations stabilize. Vanessa proposed hosting a private gathering to introduce you properly to our network. Ronald, meanwhile, adopted a softer approach. "You've always trusted me," he said that night in the guest room doorway. Tracy closed her notebook before responding. "I've always documented," she corrected quietly. The distinction unsettled him. "I'm your husband," he said. "Yes, that means something." "It does," she agreed. "It means responsibility. For both of us," he pressed. "For each of us," she clarified. He left without finishing the sentence he had prepared. The next morning, Tracy boarded the train to Manhattan alone. The sky was overcast, the river gray and steady beneath it. She carried a leather folder Melissa had provided empty, for now waiting to be filled with confirmations. Carter and Associates occupied the 12th floor of a glass building in Midtown. The reception area was understated. No ostentatious displays of wealth, only precision. Melissa greeted her personally. "Are you prepared?" she asked. "Yes." Inside the conference room, Daniel Brooks was already seated along with a compliance officer and a paralegal recording minutes. No Witmores. Melissa began with procedural confirmations, identity verification, acknowledgement of beneficiary status, trustee activation upon Edward Gordon's passing. Then she slid a comprehensive asset summary across the table. "This is the full breakdown," she said. Tracy reviewed the pages slowly. Global infrastructure holdings, majority stakes in logistics corridors, private equity funds, maritime shipping lines, renewable energy installations, commercial real estate in 5 countries, was liquid reserves diversified across institutions. The number at the top of the final page confirmed what she had seen in the hospital room. $14,287,000,000. This valuation fluctuates with market conditions, Daniel said. But the structural control remains constant. Melissa folded her hands. "Your father established 3 protective layers," she explained. "First, irrevocability. The trust cannot be dissolved by marital claim. Second, distribution controls. Any disbursement above a defined threshold requires trustee concurrence and documented purpose. Third, marital insulation." "What does marital insulation include?" Tracy asked. "It prevents a spouse from accessing, leveraging, or obligating trust assets without explicit trustee authorization," Melissa said. "Additionally, any attempt to coerce or manipulate beneficiary decisions triggers a review." Tracy absorbed the phrasing. "Coerce," she repeated. "Yes," Daniel said. "Financial coercion is defined clearly." Melissa leaned slightly forward. "Your father anticipated pressure." The word returned. Pressure. Tracy nodded once. "Has there been any attempt so far?" Melissa asked carefully. Tracy considered. "Not directly," she said. "But there have been documents." "What kind of documents?" "Joint credit expansions, signature authorizations, investment proposals requiring my name." Daniel exchanged a glance with Melissa. "Have you signed any?" he asked. "No." Melissa's expression did not change, but approval registered subtly. That was wise. They moved through additional clauses, philanthropic allowances, private security contingencies, advisory boards Tracy could appoint at her discretion. None of it overwhelmed her. What steadied her most was structure. When the meeting concluded, Melissa handed her a secure tablet. "This device contains encrypted access to trust reporting," she said. "Only you and the trustees have credentials." Tracy accepted it. Outside, the city moved without awareness of what had just shifted. Back in Westchester, the Witmore dining room hosted a different kind of conference. Ronald sat at the head of the table, Patricia to his right, Vanessa across from him. She went alone. Vanessa said, irritation edging her voice. "She had no choice," Patricia replied. "Lawyers create unnecessary barriers." Ronald stared at his phone. "She'll tell me everything," he said. Patricia's gaze sharpened. "Make sure she does." That evening when Tracy returned, the house felt expectant. Ronald met her in the foyer. "How did it go?" he asked. "It was thorough," she said. "And the structure stands." He waited for elaboration. None came. Patricia entered from the dining room. "We're all family here," she said. "You don't need to keep secrets." Tracy looked at her calmly. It isn't secrecy, she said. It's compliance. Vanessa crossed her arms. You're different, she observed. No, Tracy replied. I'm informed. Later that night, as she reviewed the encrypted tablet in the guest room, an alert appeared. A pending request for increased joint credit authorization initiated by Ronald that afternoon. The amount was significant. It required her signature. Tracy studied the timestamp, 11:42 a.m. during her conference. She opened her Navy notebook. November 13th. Credit expansion request, $3.2 million. Initiated without discussion. She did not confront him immediately. Instead, she forwarded the alert to Melissa with a single line. Please confirm protective clause applicability. The response arrived within 30 minutes. Request falls under marital insulation review. Do not sign. We will document. Tracy closed the tablet. Downstairs, Ronald poured himself a drink. Upstairs, Patricia drafted talking points for what she believed would be a family negotiation. Vanessa texted her husband about potential strategic alignment. None of them realized that every action taken now intersected with a structure they could not penetrate. Tracy turned off the light and lay back against the pillow. Silence filled the room again. But it was no longer the silence of accommodation. It was the silence of alignment with law. And beneath the Whitmore roof, immaculate, symmetrical, confident pressure had begun to shift direction. The shift did not come with shouting. It came with paperwork. Ronald did not mention the $3.2 million credit expansion request at dinner that night. He spoke instead about market volatility, about the importance of liquidity during uncertain quarters. Patricia nodded thoughtfully. Vanessa offered anecdotes about acquaintances who had missed opportunities by hesitating. Tracy listened. She did not interrupt. She did not accuse. But she noticed how often Ronald's phone lit up beside his plate messages from a private banker whose name she now recognized from the trust's competitive holdings list. After dinner, Ronald followed her into the hallway. There's a small authorization pending, he said casually. Routine expansion. We should finalize it tomorrow. I saw it, Tracy replied, and I haven't signed. His jaw tightened. Why not? I wanted clarification. Clarification about what he pressed. The necessity. He exhaled slowly. It's strategic. You wouldn't question it if you understood the timing. She held his gaze. Then explain the timing. He hesitated. It was subtle, a fraction of a second, but Tracy saw it. It's leverage, he said finally. Pre-approval ensures flexibility. For what purchase? For future positioning. Positioning in what? His irritation surfaced. You're being difficult. No, she said evenly. I'm being informed. Patricia's voice floated from the living room. Is everything all right? Ronald forced a smile before answering. Fine. Later that night, Tracy received a second alert on the encrypted tablet. This one came not from Ronald, but from the trust's compliance system. A flagged inquiry. Someone had attempted to access beneficiary distribution protocols using partial identifying information, marital association, residential address, joint account history. The attempt had been denied automatically. The source IP traced back to Westchester. Tracy read the technical report twice. Then she opened her Navy notebook. November 14th. Unauthorized inquiry blocked. Source local. She did not need to ask who had initiated it. In the morning, Melissa Carter called. We detected access attempts, she said without preamble. I saw the alert. Melissa's voice remained calm but firmer than usual. This activates a review clause. What does that involve? Documentation of potential coercive or exploratory interference. We proceed carefully. Tracy stood by the guest room window, watching frost collect along the hedges outside. I haven't confronted anyone, she said. That's wise, Melissa replied. Observation is stronger than accusation. Downstairs, Patricia prepared breakfast as though the house remained unchanged. Vanessa arrived early again. Ronald joined them dressed for the office, but lingering. We need alignment, Patricia said once Tracy entered the kitchen. This distance is unnecessary. Tracy poured herself coffee. What distance, the legal one, Vanessa said. It feels adversarial. Legal structures aren't emotional, Tracy answered. They're protective. Ronald's patience thinned. Protective from what? From me. The question hovered in the air. Tracy met his eyes. From incentives. He recoiled slightly at the phrasing, the same word Edward had used. You think I married you for money? He asked. I think incentives influence behavior, she replied. Patricia stood abruptly. This is insulting. No, Tracy said quietly. It's factual. Ronald's voice lowered. You're letting that lawyer poison you? She's clarifying structures my father built years ago. Years ago, Vanessa echoed. You didn't even know about them. Exactly, Tracy said. The table fell silent. What none of them fully grasped was that the trust's third protective layer had already begun its silent function. Under marital insulation clauses, any documented attempt to access, obligate, or leverage trust-related information without beneficiary consent triggered an advisory review. Daniel Brooks had already prepared a memorandum. By afternoon, Melissa emailed Tracy a draft. Subject, Notice of Protective Review. It outlined the unauthorized inquiry attempt, referenced timestamps, and confirmed that trustees would formally caution any external party found interfering. Would you like to identify the source directly, Melissa asked during a follow-up call. No, Tracy said. Let it document itself. That evening, Ronald approached her again, this time with printed financial projections. If we consolidate liquidity, he began spreading charts across the dining table, we could amplify returns significantly. With whose capital, Tracy asked. Ours, he replied. Ours, she repeated. He pointed to the projections. If even a fraction of the trust were repositioned under joint management. It won't be, she interrupted gently. His composure cracked. You can't make unilateral decisions about something this large. I can, she said calmly. That's the structure. Patricia interjected sharply. Marriage implies partnership. Yes, Tracy agreed, not access. Vanessa leaned back in her chair. You've changed. No, Tracy said. The assumptions have. Ronald gathered the papers abruptly. You're overreacting, he muttered. To documentation, she asked. He stared at her. What documentation, he demanded. She did not answer. Upstairs, she reviewed bank statements from the joint account, the one Ronald controlled. There it was. A consulting transfer of $480,000 to an LLC she did not recognize. Dated the day after Edward's death. She cross-referenced the LLC name, registered to an address linked to Ronald's college acquaintance. She wrote in the notebook, November 15th, $480,000 transfer Gordon joint account. Recipient RWH Capital Advisory, LLC. She forwarded the statement to Melissa. The response arrived within an hour. This may constitute marital asset reallocation during a pending estate activation period. Do not confront. We will review. Downstairs, Ronald poured another drink. He believed acceleration would outrun scrutiny. He did not understand that every movement now left a record. The next morning, a formal letter arrived at the Witmore house addressed to Ronald Witmore. Carter and Associates. Patricia watched him open it. His expression shifted from irritation to unease. The letter did not accuse. It notified. It informed him that any attempt to access influence or obligate assets within the Gordon Trust structure without beneficiary authorization would be documented and could trigger civil action. It referenced timestamps. It referenced compliance logs. It referenced fiduciary oversight. Patricia's hands trembled slightly as she read over his shoulder. This is outrageous, she whispered. It's lawful, Tracy said from the doorway. Ronald looked up at her, not angry now, but uncertain. You reported me, he asked. I forwarded documentation, she replied. The distinction mattered. Vanessa's voice rose. You're turning this into litigation. No, Tracy said quietly. It already was. Silence expanded across the room. For the first time, the Witmore house felt imbalanced. The columns outside still stood symmetrical. The flag still moved in the winter wind. But inside, the architecture of assumption had cracked. Tracy did not smile. She did not gloat. She simply returned to the guest room, opened her notebook, and wrote, "Protective review initiated." The power shift did not come through confrontation. It came through evidence. And evidence once recorded did not argue. It waited. The letter from Carter and Associates did not threaten. It clarified. That was what unsettled Ronald the most. There had been no dramatic accusation. No police. No lawsuit filed yet. Only a formal notice that his actions were visible, time-stamped, and preserved under fiduciary review. Visibility altered behavior. For 48 hours after the letter arrived, Ronald was controlled, measured, almost apologetic. "It was a misunderstanding," he said one evening, standing in the doorway of the guest room. "The inquiry, the transfer, timing just overlapped." Tracy closed the encrypted tablet before answering. Overlapped with what she asked. "With your father's passing, with transition. It wasn't intentional." She studied his face. He believed intention was the only thing that mattered. He had not yet grasped that structure superseded motive. "You didn't discuss the transfer," she said. "It was routine. $480,000 isn't routine. It's relative." "To what to scale?" he snapped, then caught himself. The word lingered in the air. Scale. He had adjusted his sense of scale already. Tracy opened her Navy notebook. November 17th. Relative. Scale. Ronald watched her write. "You're documenting everything now?" he asked. "I always have." He stared at her, searching for sarcasm. There was none. Downstairs, Patricia was no longer subtle. "This adversarial posture must stop," she said at breakfast the next morning. "Lawyers thrive on division. Lawyers document division," Tracy replied calmly. Vanessa tapped her phone against the table. "Everyone is talking," she said. "About what?" Tracy asked. "About the trust." "How would they know?" Tracy asked voice level. Vanessa hesitated a fraction too long. Information had begun leaking. Later that day, Melissa Carter called with a tone that carried less neutrality than usual. "Daniel completed preliminary tracing on the $480,000 transfer," she said. And Tracy asked, "It routed through RWH Capital Advisory LLC, as you noted. That LLC is newly formed. Minimal operational history. Ownership indirectly tied to Ronald Witmore." Tracy leaned back in her chair. "So it wasn't investment repositioning," she said. "It appears preparatory," Melissa replied. "For what? For leverage?" The word settled heavily. "Daniel believes the intent may have been to establish a vehicle capable of receiving larger transfers if access had been obtained." Silence stretched between them. "He was building a funnel," Tracy said quietly. "Yes." The confirmation did not shock her. It clarified. Melissa continued, "Because the transfer originated from a joint marital account. We must differentiate between shared marital funds and potential anticipatory movement related to the trust. Can it be reversed?" Tracy asked. "Legally, yes, if we demonstrate premeditated diversion during an estate activation period. Will that require litigation? Possibly. But documentation strengthens position." Tracy closed her eyes briefly. "I don't want spectacle," she said. "Then we proceed methodically," Melissa replied. That evening, Tracy sat across from Ronald at the dining table. Patricia and Vanessa had retreated upstairs under the pretense of privacy. She placed a printed bank statement between them. "Explain this," she said. Ronald glanced down. "I already did. Explain why the LLC was registered 2 weeks before my father died." He froze. The silence that followed was no longer defensive, it was exposed. "It was diversification planning," he said finally. "For whose capital? Ours." "Ours," she repeated. "Before the trust was activated, he said nothing." "You anticipated liquidity," she continued. He pushed back from the table. "You're twisting this." "No," she said. "I'm aligning timestamps." His voice rose. "You think I would steal from you. I think you prepared access before asking permission." Patricia appeared at the doorway. "This interrogation is unnecessary," she said sharply. "It's not interrogation," Tracy replied. "It's verification." Vanessa followed, arms crossed. "Do you even hear yourself?" she demanded. This is marriage, not a deposition. Tracy met her gaze. Marriage doesn't erase documentation. Ronald's frustration cracked through restraint. You're acting like I'm the enemy. You activated protective clauses, she said quietly. Not me. He stared at her as if seeing her clearly for the first time. Upstairs that night, Tracy received another alert. This one more serious. An internal compliance flag triggered by a third-party inquiry not through digital access this time, but through a regional banking contact. Someone had informally inquired about potential loan structures backed by anticipated beneficiary distributions. The name attached to the inquiry, Ronald Witmore. Melissa called immediately. He approached First Atlantic Private Bank, she said, indicating potential future access to trust liquidity. Was any information disclosed, Tracy asked. No. They contacted us directly. Tracy exhaled slowly. He's escalating. Yes. What does this activate? A formal warning and potential civil notice of attempted misrepresentation. Will that become public? Not unless pursued. Tracy considered. She did not want spectacle, but she would not absorb erosion. Proceed with formal warning, she said. Downstairs, Ronald paced the living room. He believed speed could outrun structure. He did not realize that every inquiry now passed through monitored channels. 2 days later, a second letter arrived. This one addressed to Ronald and copied to Patricia Witmore. It outlined the unauthorized bank approach, referenced fiduciary oversight, and warned that continued attempts to represent access to the Gordon Trust could constitute financial misrepresentation. Patricia read it twice. This is harassment, she said. It's documentation. Tracy answered from the staircase. Ronald looked up at her anger, finally surfacing openly. You involved them again. I didn't need to, she replied. You did. Vanessa's composure fractured. You're humiliating this family. Tracy descended the stairs slowly. No, she said. I'm protecting mine. The distinction hung in the room. For the first time since Edward's death, the Witmore household felt unstable. Not financially yet, but reputationally. Ronald worked in finance. Letters like this even privately left traces. Tracy returned to the guest room and opened her notebook. November 20th. Bank inquiry, First Atlantic. Formal warning issued. She paused before adding, Escalation documented. Outside, winter settled deeper across Westchester. Inside, the quiet architecture of law tightened. Tracy did not raise her voice. She did not threaten divorce. She did not accuse. She forwarded documents. She preserved timestamps. She allowed process to move where confrontation once would have. And in doing so, she shifted power not through volume, but through evidence. The Witmores had mistaken her silence for absence. Now they were learning it had always been preparation. Pressure changed temperature inside the Witmore house. It no longer felt like superiority. It felt like surveillance. Ronald stopped leaving documents in open sight. His laptop remained locked even during short absences. Phone calls were taken outside in the cold, pacing along the stone walkway beneath the bare maple trees. Patricia began speaking in lowered tones. Vanessa visited less frequently, but when she did, her questions carried sharper edges. Tracy did nothing differently. That unsettled them more than accusation would have. 3 days after the second formal warning letter, Ronald attempted a different approach. He came home with flowers. Not extravagant, not romantic, strategic. We need to reset, he said, placing them carefully in a vase on the kitchen counter. This tension isn't healthy. Tracy rinsed a glass in the sink before answering. Tension follows documentation, she said. It follows distrust, he corrected. She turned off the water and faced him. Trust requires disclosure. He stepped closer. I'm disclosing now. You're responding now, she said. His jaw tightened. You're punishing me. I'm aligning with the structure my father built. The repetition of that sentence had begun to wear at him. He changed tactics. Let's move, he said abruptly. Move where out of this house? Fresh start, Manhattan. Closer to your trustees. It'll show good faith. Tracy studied him. Whose name would be on the property? Ours. And the funding source? He hesitated again. She saw it. "You're still thinking in terms of access," she said quietly. He exhaled sharply. "You can't live like this, guarding everything." "I'm not guarding," she replied. "I'm complying." Later that night, another alert arrived on the encrypted tablet. This one carried more gravity. Daniel Brooks had completed forensic tracing of RWH Capital Advisory LLC. The $480,000 transfer had not remained idle. It had been repositioned into short-term leveraged instruments, high-risk, high-volatility options tied to infrastructure indexes closely mirroring components within the Gordon Trust. In other words, Ronald had attempted to mirror trust holdings privately. Tracy read the report twice, then once more. He hadn't merely prepared a funnel. He had attempted parallel positioning. Melissa called within minutes. "This suggests anticipatory arbitrage," she said. "Explain," Tracy replied. If he believed access was imminent, he could have used leveraged gains to argue expertise, justify management involvement, or offset risk narratives. "Without my consent," Tracy said. "Yes. And if those trades had failed, he would have carried the loss unless he intended to seek reimbursement under marital asset blending." The room felt colder. "So either outcome positioned him," Tracy said. "Correct." Tracy walked to the window and stared into the dark backyard. "He underestimated timeline control," she said. "Yes," Melissa replied. "Proceed with documentation," Tracy said. The following morning, Daniel's office transmitted a formal inquiry notice to Ronald, requesting clarification of his financial representations tied to trust-adjacent asset positioning. The letter was not aggressive. It was precise. It referenced timestamps, transaction codes, and derivative exposure. It requested written explanation within 5 business days. At breakfast, Ronald read the letter in silence. Patricia's face drained of color as she skimmed over his shoulder. "This is escalating," she whispered. "It's inquiry," Tracy corrected calmly. Vanessa, who had arrived early again, stared at her brother. "You told me it was clean," she said. "It is," Ronald snapped. "Then why are they tracing it?" He didn't answer. Tracy sipped her coffee. "You should respond in writing," she said evenly. He looked at her sharply. "You think I don't know that I think documentation matters?" He pushed back from the table so abruptly, the chair legs scraped loudly against the hardwood. "This is hostile," he said. "No," Tracy replied. "It's visible." The word hung between them. Visible. The very thing Edward Gordon had built his life avoiding. Ronald left for work without finishing breakfast. By noon, Vanessa called Tracy directly for the first time without including Ronald. "You're destroying him," she said. "I'm not taking action," Tracy replied. "He is. You could stop this. How withdraw the complaints?" "There are no complaints." Vanessa's voice sharpened. "Then tell your lawyers to stand down." "They're not standing up," Tracy said. "They're recording." Silence. "You've changed," Vanessa said again. "No," Tracy answered. "Your assumptions did." That afternoon, Tracy received another update from Daniel. The leveraged positions Ronald had taken were losing value rapidly due to market shifts. Margin pressure was building. If liquidation occurred, significant personal loss would follow. Melissa's message was concise. If he attempts to cover loss via joint account, draw alert immediately. Tracy walked downstairs. Ronald was in his office door, partially closed. She knocked once. He looked up, eyes rimmed with strain. What he said. "Have you taken leverage positions recently?" she asked calmly. He froze. "Who told you that no one needed to?" He stood abruptly. "You're spying on me. I'm observing shared accounts." "They're not shared," he snapped before realizing what he'd said. The admission landed heavily. Tracy met his gaze. "Exactly." Patricia appeared in the hallway. "What's going on?" Ronald ran a hand through his hair. "Nothing." Tracy turned to leave. "Respond to the letter," she said quietly. "In writing." That evening, the Witmore house felt like a structure under strain. No one spoke during dinner. Vanessa did not return calls. Patricia remained in the sitting room, staring at nothing. Upstairs, Tracy opened her Navy notebook. November 23rd. Leveraged exposure confirmed. Margin risk increasing. She paused before writing one final line, risk self-inflicted. 2 days later, Daniel forwarded another alert. RWH Capital Advisory LLC had initiated emergency liquidation. Loss realized $312,000. Shortly after, a transfer attempt from the joint account triggered review. The system blocked it. Tracy forwarded the alert to Melissa without commentary. The response was swift. Pattern confirmed. This will be included in protective escalation file. When Ronald received the notification that the transfer had been denied pending review, something in him fractured. He confronted Tracy in the living room. "You blocked my account," he accused. "No," she said calmly. "The bank flagged irregular activity. You involved them. You involved them." He stepped closer, voice rising. "You're enjoying this." Her expression did not change. "No." "Then why won't you help me?" "I am," she said quietly, "by not allowing this to become criminal." The word silenced him. Criminal. He stepped back. For the first time, fear, not anger, flickered across his face. Tracy returned upstairs without another word. She did not smile. She did not gloat. She opened her notebook and wrote, "Escalation nearing threshold." Outside, snow began to fall softly across the Whitmore lawn. Inside the structure Edward Gordon had built continued to activate not through revenge, not through confrontation, but through documented sequence. And Ronald Whitmore, who had believed anticipation equaled advantage, was beginning to understand the difference between access and ownership. He had tried to outrun the architecture, but architecture once set did not chase. It waited. Loss changes posture. Ronald stopped pacing after the liquidation notice. He stopped speaking in future projections. He stopped using words like leverage and positioning. For 2 days, he said very little at all. The Whitmore house absorbed the shift uneasily. Patricia avoided eye contact with Tracy. Vanessa stopped visiting entirely. The atmosphere was no longer strategic, it was defensive. On Monday morning, a formal envelope arrived by courier, not from Carter and Associates, from Ronald's employer. Whitmore and Klein Capital Management had initiated an internal review. The reason was carefully worded potential conflict of interest involving anticipatory positioning tied to a private estate structure under fiduciary oversight. The language was neutral. The implication was not. Ronald read the letter twice, then a third time. "This is absurd," he muttered. Tracy stood near the staircase watching. "Internal reviews are standard when documentation surfaces," she said calmly. He looked up sharply. "You sent this to my firm." "No," she replied. "Your inquiries did." He laughed once without humor. "You think compliance departments don't talk?" She did not answer. He understood. Financial institutions monitored unusual activity. When First Atlantic Private Bank had flagged his inquiry to the trustees, documentation followed. When trustees documented leveraged parallels, industry channels tightened. He had not accounted for professional visibility. Patricia entered the room slowly. "What does it say?" she asked. Ronald handed her the letter. Her face paled as she read. "They can't do this," she whispered. "They can," Tracy said softly. "It's standard procedure." Ronald turned toward her. "You're dismantling my career." "I'm not taking action," she said. "You are." The repetition no longer sounded calm. It sounded final. That afternoon, Melissa Carter called with a different tone, not urgent, not alarmed. Measured. "We've reached the next threshold," she said. "What does that mean?" Tracy asked. "Repeated access attempts, leveraged mirroring, joint account diversion attempts, third-party financial misrepresentation. Together they satisfy coercive pattern criteria under the trust's protective clause." Tracy leaned back in the guest room chair. "And what activates now? Formal separation recommendation." The words settled between them. Melissa continued. "Your father anticipated that financial pressure might escalate under certain conditions. If documentation reached this threshold, trustees were instructed to advise beneficiary separation from any cohabitating party engaged in coercive behavior." "Separation," Tracy repeated. "Yes. Legal, residential, and financial." Tracy closed her eyes briefly. not in grief, in recognition. Edward had built not only insulation, but exit routes. "What are the implications?" she asked. "You would file for marital separation or divorce. Trustees would assist in securing alternate residence. Protective orders are optional, unless behavior escalates. Would it become public? Not unless contested." Silence lingered. "Do you recommend it?" Tracy asked. Melissa did not hesitate. "Yes." Downstairs, Ronald sat alone at the dining table. He had not returned calls from his firm. He had not responded to Daniel's written inquiry either. Instead, he had drafted an email unsent, explaining that everything had been misunderstood, that he had acted only to safeguard marital stability. He stared at the screen, then deleted it. Tracy walked into the dining room. "We need to talk," she said. He looked up slowly. "You're filing," he guessed. "I'm considering it." His laugh was hollow. "Because of paperwork, because of a pattern. I never took $1 from the trust. You prepared to. That's not illegal. It's coercive." His jaw tightened. "You're using language you barely understood a month ago." "No," she said quietly. "I'm using language my father anticipated." He stood abruptly. "This is madness. It's documentation." Patricia appeared in the doorway again, drawn by raised voices. "Ronald," she said sharply, "control yourself." He turned toward her. "You told me it was safe," he said. Her composure faltered. "I told you it was manageable." Tracy watched the exchange without expression. There it was, alignment of incentives exposed. That night, she met Melissa and Daniel in Manhattan again. This time, the conference room atmosphere was different, not exploratory, not informative, decisive. Melissa slid a prepared packet across the table. "Petition for dissolution," she said. "Grounds financial coercion, breach of fiduciary alignment, and attempted asset manipulation." Daniel added, "Trust resources will cover legal fees under beneficiary protection clause." Tracy read the first page carefully, then the second. Then she signed. The pen did not tremble. Back in Westchester, snow covered the Whitmore lawn in smooth, undisturbed white. Inside, Ronald received formal notice the next morning. He stood in the foyer, holding the envelope, expression unreadable. Patricia read it over his shoulder again. Vanessa arrived within the hour. "This is catastrophic," she whispered. "No," Tracy said from the staircase. "It's procedural." Ronald looked up at her. "You're serious?" "Yes, you're ending this. I'm protecting it." He stared at her. "For $14 billion? For structure," she corrected. Silence expanded through the house like a crack widening. He stepped forward. "You think you'll walk away untouched?" She held his gaze. "I already have." That afternoon, Daniel initiated protective measures. Joint accounts were frozen pending review. Trust reporting access was updated to reflect spousal separation status. A secure apartment in Manhattan, owned through a trust subsidiary, was prepared for Tracy's relocation. When she packed her suitcase, she did not rush. She folded each garment with care. She placed the navy notebook at the top. Ronald stood in the doorway. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly. "Possibly," she replied, "but not legally." He flinched. She paused before leaving. "This didn't begin with the trust," she said. "It began with assumption." He said nothing. Outside, the winter air felt sharp but clean. The Whitmore house remained immaculate columns, steady windows, symmetrical flag, unmoved. But its interior equilibrium had fractured beyond quiet repair. Tracy stepped into the waiting car, arranged by Daniel Brooks. As it pulled away, she did not look back, not out of anger, not out of triumph. But because departure, once documented and filed, did not require witness. The Manhattan apartment was quiet in a way the Whitmore house had never been. Not silent, the city carried its own rhythm beyond the windows, but unpressured. No calibrated glances, no conversations angled toward acquisition, no footsteps pausing outside a guest room door. Tracy set her suitcase on the hardwood floor and stood still for a moment. The apartment belonged to a subsidiary holding company within the Gordon Trust structure. It was not extravagant. 2 bedrooms, clean lines, neutral tones, intentional privacy. Security downstairs required coded access. Edward had thought of that too. Melissa had arranged everything without spectacle. Lease transfers, utility activation, temporary staff access, all handled quietly, efficiently, lawfully. The separation filing had been delivered to Ronald 48 hours earlier. He had not contested it yet. But he had responded. 3 missed calls, 1 voicemail. Tracy listened to the voicemail once. Tracy Ronald's voice said lower than usual, stripped of its performative control. "This doesn't have to escalate. We can fix this privately. Call me." She did not delete it. She forwarded it to Melissa. Documentation. The next morning, Daniel Brooks arrived with 2 binders. One for financial review, he said, placing the heavier binder on the dining table. One for evidentiary consolidation. Tracy sat across from him. "What does evidentiary consolidation include?" she asked. "Email chains, transaction histories, bank inquiries, voicemail transcripts, compliance logs." He opened the second binder. Each tab was labeled with date and category. Unauthorized inquiry, First Atlantic. Leveraged mirror positioning, RWH Capital Advisory, LLC. Joint account diversion attempt margin coverage, spousal pressure communications, documented statements. Daniel did not dramatize the contents. He did not need to. The pages spoke in timestamps. "Your father anticipated escalation under emotional leverage," Daniel said calmly. The trust includes advisory language, encouraging beneficiaries to avoid proximity to coercive influence. Advisory language, Tracy repeated. "Yes, not mandatory, but clear. And now we proceed with civil protection, not criminal prosecution, unless behavior intensifies." Tracy nodded. She did not want spectacle. She wanted alignment. Across town, Ronald sat in a conference room at Whitmore and Klein Capital. 2 compliance officers and a managing partner faced him across a long glass table. "This isn't an accusation," the managing partner said evenly. "It's a review." Ronald's jaw tightened. "I made no withdrawals from the estate," he said. "That isn't the concern," one compliance officer replied. "The concern is anticipatory positioning tied to privileged knowledge. I had no privileged knowledge. You had marital proximity." The phrase felt clinical. "You approached First Atlantic Private Bank," the partner continued. "You referenced anticipated beneficiary distribution. I was exploring options. Exploration tied to non-disclosed estate structures creates exposure." Ronald leaned back. "So I'm guilty of being married. You're under review for a conflict of interest." The distinction mattered. Back in Manhattan, Tracy reviewed the financial binders slowly. She did not skim. She absorbed. She saw how quickly Ronald's activity had intensified after the trust valuation was revealed. She saw the exact day he registered the LLC. She saw the timestamps on leveraged trades. She saw the blocked transfer attempt. She wrote in her notebook, "Pattern escalation timeline confirmed." There was no anger in the ink, only sequence. That afternoon, Patricia Whitmore called. Tracy considered declining, then answered, "This is unnecessary." Patricia began without greeting. "Which part?" Tracy asked. "The separation, the filings, the documentation. It's procedural. You're humiliating, Ronald. I'm responding to documentation." Patricia exhaled sharply. "You could have handled this privately." "I did," Tracy replied. "For years." Silence. "You think this trust protects you?" Patricia asked. "It protects structure. And what about marriage? Marriage doesn't override law." Patricia's composure cracked. "You were nothing before this." The words hung in the air. Tracy did not react immediately. Then she answered calmly. "I was observant." She ended the call. Documentation did not require retaliation. 2 days later, Ronald filed a response, not contesting the separation, not yet, but requesting mediation. The request cited miscommunication and mutual financial stress. Melissa reviewed the filing with Tracy. "He's repositioning," she said, as what Tracy asked. As misunderstood, Tracy considered. "Do we accept mediation?" Melissa paused. "If your objective is quiet resolution, yes. But mediation requires transparency." "Then we accept," Tracy said. The mediation session was scheduled for the following week in a neutral Midtown office. Ronald arrived early. Patricia did not attend. Vanessa did not either. Just Ronald and his attorney. Tracy entered with Melissa Carter and Daniel Brooks. No raised voices, no theatrical confrontation. The mediator began with formal introductions. Mr. Witmore, the mediator, said, "You requested this session?" Ronald nodded. "I want to resolve this without escalation." "What resolution are you seeking?" the mediator asked. "A structured agreement," Ronald replied. "Mutual asset planning, transparency." Melissa slid a document across the table. "This is the trust's marital insulation clause," she said calmly. Ronald's attorney scanned it quickly. "This doesn't preclude negotiation," he argued. "It precludes access," Daniel corrected. Ronald leaned forward. "I don't want access," he said. "I want partnership." Tracy met his eyes. "Partnership requires disclosure before leverage," she said quietly. "I never leveraged," he insisted. Melissa opened the evidentiary binder. "First Atlantic inquiry," she said. Daniel turned a page. LLC registration date. Another page. Leveraged mirror positioning. Another. Joint account diversion attempt. Each document was placed between them like a measured stone. No one raised their voice. No one accused. Paper accumulated. The mediator cleared his throat softly. "Mr. Witmore," he said, "these are not abstract concerns." Ronald's shoulders stiffened. "You're painting this as malicious." "No," Tracy said calmly, "as documented." Silence filled the room. For the first time, Ronald seemed smaller, not humiliated, contained. "What are you asking for?" he said finally. "Dissolution," Tracy replied, "without contest. And in return, no public filing beyond necessity." He absorbed that. "You're leaving," he said. "Yes." He looked at her for a long moment. "You're not angry," he observed. "No." "Then what are you aligned?" The mediator wrote notes. The attorneys exchanged documents. Outside Manhattan moved without awareness. Inside the conference room, architecture held. The session ended without drama. Ronald agreed to uncontested dissolution pending final review. As Tracy left the building, winter light reflected off glass towers. She did not feel victorious. She felt precise. Back at the apartment, she opened her Navy notebook. Mediation initiated. Contest unlikely. She paused before adding, structure intact. In Westchester, the Witmore house remained immaculate. But its assumptions had dissolved. And Tracy Gordon, who had once been underestimated in science, now moved within a structure that did not require defense, only documentation. Mediation did not end the matter. It clarified its direction. Within a week, Ronald's attorney submitted a revised proposal uncontested dissolution in exchange for retention of certain marital assets and confidentiality clauses restricting public disclosure of internal trust details. Melissa Carter reviewed the language carefully. "They're prioritizing reputation containment," she said, seated across from Tracy in the Manhattan apartment. "Is that unreasonable?" Tracy asked. "No," Melissa replied. "It's predictable." Daniel Brooks joined them via secure video link. "There's an additional layer," he said. "Ronald's firm has placed him on temporary administrative leave, pending completion of their internal review." Tracy absorbed the information without visible reaction. "Is he likely to lose his position?" she asked. "Uncertain," Daniel answered. "Conflict reviews are sensitive in finance." The structure Edward built had not aimed for punishment. It aimed for insulation. Consequences were collateral, not intent. That evening, Ronald requested a private meeting. Not mediation, not through attorneys, directly. Melissa advised against it. "If you meet, record the interaction," she said. "At minimum, document immediately afterward." Tracy considered, then agreed to meet in a public setting. A quiet cafe near Bryant Park. Mid-afternoon. Neutral. Ronald arrived early. He looked thinner, less composed. No performative polish. When Tracy entered, he stood automatically in old habit. She sat across from him. For a moment, neither spoke. "I never thought it would go this far," he said finally. "Went exactly as far as documentation allowed," she replied. He looked down at his hands. "You think I married you for access? I think you recalibrated when you saw scale." His mouth tightened. "Anyone would have. That's the point." Silence settled between them. "I didn't want to hurt you," he said. "You wanted leverage." That's not the same. It is under fiduciary language. He exhaled sharply. Do you even hear yourself? Yes. You're talking like a contract. I'm responding to one. He looked up at her, then really looked. You're not angry? No. Then why won't you stay? Because I can't stay where incentives shift faster than respect. He had no answer for that. The cafe noise filled the silence. I'll sign, he said at last. I know. He nodded once. Will you testify against me? No. Will you pursue damages? No. Why? Because I don't need to. He studied her face, searching for vindication. There was none, only steadiness. When they parted, it felt less like confrontation and more like conclusion. 2 days later, the internal review at Whitmore & Klein concluded. Ronald was formally terminated. The official language cited failure to disclose potential conflicts tied to anticipatory financial positioning. No criminal referral, no public scandal. But his career in that firm was over. Patricia called Tracy the same evening. You've ruined him, she said. I didn't file the review, Tracy replied calmly. You triggered it. No, she said. He did. Patricia's voice trembled, not from sorrow, but from destabilization. You walked into our family with nothing. I walked in observant. You walked out with everything. No. Tracy corrected. I walked out aligned. She ended the call. Documentation did not require debate. The uncontested dissolution paperwork was finalized within 3 weeks. Ronald signed without amendment. His attorney added standard language protecting both parties from defamation. Melissa ensured that trust details remained sealed. The court hearing was brief. No theatrics, no accusations. The judge reviewed the filings, confirmed mutual agreement, and granted dissolution. Tracy did not look at Ronald as the order was entered, not out of bitterness, out of completion. Outside the courthouse, winter air cut sharply across the steps. Reporters were absent. There was nothing sensational to report. Structure had contained spectacle. Back in Manhattan, Tracy returned to the apartment and placed the final stamped document in the evidentiary binder. She opened her Navy notebook. Dissolution finalized, uncontested. She paused before adding, no escalation required. Later that evening, Melissa and Daniel joined her for a final review session. The protective clause deactivates automatically upon marital dissolution, Daniel explained. You now hold unrestricted beneficiary authority within trustee parameters. Tracy nodded. And reputational exposure, she asked. Minimal, Melissa said. No public filings reference asset scale. Tracy considered for a moment. I don't want retribution, she said. You've never pursued it, Melissa replied. That wasn't strength, Tracy said quietly. It was, Melissa answered. There was a pause. Your father anticipated emotional pressure, Daniel said. He structured for insulation, not revenge. Tracy looked down at her hands. I know. Weeks passed. Ronald relocated to a smaller apartment in Connecticut. Patricia withdrew from certain social circles. Vanessa adjusted her tone, publicly framing events as mutual separation. No one mentioned the trust. No one mentioned the number. Architecture had done its work. In early spring, Tracy visited the East River again, the same stretch of water visible from her father's hospital room. She stood quietly, hands folded in front of her, not grieving in spectacle, not celebrating in triumph, aligned. Her phone buzzed with a notification from Daniel, quarterly trust report available. She did not open it immediately. She watched the river instead. Structure did not require constant supervision. It required steadiness. Edward Gordon had not taught her warmth. He had taught her systems, and systems once understood did not demand noise. They demanded clarity. As the light shifted across the water, Tracy opened her notebook one last time and wrote architecture held. Then she closed it. Not because documentation had ended, but because escalation had. Spring did not announce itself in Manhattan. It edged in quietly lighter mornings, longer shadows across the East River, the faint green suggestion of trees along the promenade. Tracy moved through her days without urgency. There were trustee briefings now structured, scheduled, deliberate. Quarterly reports, portfolio summaries, risk assessments. Daniel Brooks walked her through global exposure maps and long-term infrastructure projections. She listened. She asked precise questions. She did not chase expansion. Your father favored endurance over velocity, Daniel explained during one session, sliding a performance chart across the table. He believed compounding stability outperformed speculative growth. Tracy studied the chart. So did he, she said quietly. Melissa joined, occasionally reviewing governance structures and beneficiary rights. There's one remaining matter, she said one afternoon. Tracy looked up. Civil closure. Regarding Ronald, Tracy asked. Yes. Though the dissolution had been finalized, the evidentiary file remained open. The Trust's Compliance Division had preserved documentation of attempted interference and leveraged positioning. No criminal referral had been made, but trustees retained the right to pursue civil damages tied to reputational or fiduciary exposure. Is that necessary, Tracy asked. Not legally, Melissa replied, but strategically it establishes boundary. Tracy considered. Will it escalate publicly, not if settled? Daniel leaned forward. There's an additional factor, he said. Ronald has applied to multiple firms. Our compliance flag appears in background inquiries. Tracy absorbed the implication. He won't be rehired easily, Daniel continued, even without public disclosure. Are we responsible for that, she asked. No, Melissa said evenly. Documentation is. Tracy sat back in her chair. I don't want punitive action, she said, but I don't want revision of narrative either. Melissa nodded. Then we proceed with formal acknowledgement. The acknowledgement was not dramatic. It was a civil affidavit filed under seal. It summarized documented actions, unauthorized inquiries, leveraged mirroring attempted account diversion. It stated that no further claims would be pursued contingent upon written acknowledgement of fiduciary boundary violation. In other words, closure with record. Ronald's attorney requested a private meeting, not mediation, resolution. This time the meeting took place in a midtown conference room with no mediator present, just attorneys. Daniel Brooks, Tracy, Ronald. He looked older, not aged by time but by recalibration. The affidavit lay on the table between them. His attorney spoke first. My client is prepared to acknowledge boundary misjudgment without admission of criminal intent. Melissa nodded. That language is acceptable. Ronald's eyes shifted toward Tracy. You're not satisfied with the divorce, he said quietly. I am, she replied. Then why this? Because narrative shifts, she said. Documentation doesn't. Silence settled. I never intended to harm you, he said again. You intended to access, she answered. That's not the same. It is under fiduciary review. His shoulders lowered. What do you want from me? Signature, she said. He looked down at the affidavit. It was 3 pages long, measured, clinical, no insults, no emotional framing, just sequence. He read it slowly. When he reached the final paragraph, acknowledgement of attempted anticipatory positioning tied to beneficiary proximity, his hand paused. Then he signed. No dramatic gesture, no protest. The pen moved across the page. Melissa gathered the document. Daniel placed it inside a secure folder. That concludes trust-related exposure, Daniel said calmly. Ronald exhaled as if something had finally been decided beyond argument. You win, he said quietly. Tracy met his gaze. There was no competition. He almost smiled, but not quite. Outside traffic moved along 6th Avenue without awareness. Inside architecture sealed. Weeks later, Tracy received a formal notification from Daniel. Trust Protective Escalation file closed. A civil acknowledgement filed under seal. Compliance review complete. She placed the notification in the evidentiary binder. Then she closed the binder and placed it on the top shelf of the apartment's built-in cabinet. Not hidden, not displayed. Filed. Patricia did not call again. Vanessa sent one brief message. Wishing you well. Tracy did not respond. There was no hostility left to answer. One afternoon, Daniel introduced a new agenda item during a trustee briefing. Philanthropic allocation, he said. Tracy nodded. She had anticipated this. Edward's trust structure allowed discretionary allocations toward educational infrastructure and maritime workforce development sectors, aligned with his professional life. "I'd like to establish a scholarship fund," she said. "In his name?" Daniel asked. "In mine," she replied after a moment. "And his, not legacy, alignment." Melissa smiled faintly. "That can be structured easily." They discussed endowment percentages, governance boards, selection committees. Tracy took notes, not in the Navy notebook this time. In a new one, clean pages, future-oriented. That evening, she walked along the East River again, the same view her father had seen in his final days. The city felt different now, not because she had changed it, but because she no longer carried negotiation inside her own home. Her phone buzzed once. A message from Ronald. Not emotional, not strategic. Signed, confirmation received. "I won't contest anything further." She read it once, then archived it. Closure did not require reply. Architecture held. Back at the apartment, she opened her new notebook and wrote, "Civil acknowledgement complete. Protective file closed." She paused, then added, "Boundary established." There was no triumph in the ink, no vindication. Only clarity. Edward Gordon had never explained himself in ways that satisfied sentiment. He had built systems instead. And Tracy Gordon, who had once been underestimated for her silence, had walked through every stage without raising her voice. The trust had not been a weapon. It had been insulation. And insulation, when intact, did not burn. It endured. The scholarship announcement was not accompanied by a gala. There were no photographers, no press releases framed around redemption or spectacle. Just a carefully drafted statement submitted to 3 maritime universities and 2 logistics institutes along the eastern seaboard. The Gordon Infrastructure Fellowship, named for Edward Gordon and Tracy Gordon, endowed permanently, focused on students entering supply chain management, port operations, and transportation systems engineering. Fields most people never glamorized. Fields that kept everything else functioning. Daniel reviewed the final documents before submission. "Your father would approve," he said. Tracy did not answer immediately. Approval wasn't his language, she replied quietly. Structure was. The first fellowship committee meeting was scheduled for early summer. Tracy attended remotely from her Manhattan apartment. 5 administrators, 2 independent industry advisors, 1 trustee representative. No Witmores. No shadow of prior negotiation. The meeting focused on eligibility metrics, geographic diversity, long-term retention incentives. Practical discussions, grounded. That evening, Tracy opened her new notebook again. Fellowship activated. Governance established. She paused, then wrote, "Forward allocation, not reaction." Across town, Ronald moved through a different recalibration. His termination from Whitmore and Klein had not been publicly announced, but within finance circles, silence carried information. He accepted a consulting contract with a smaller advisory firm in Connecticut. Lower profile, lower compensation, no equity stake. Patricia had not adjusted well. Her social calendar thinned. Certain invitations ceased. Vanessa distanced herself quietly, citing schedule constraints. No one mentioned the trust. But absence spoke. One afternoon, Melissa informed Tracy of a final administrative step. "Your marital status update has cleared across all reporting entities," she said. "There are no residual financial linkages." "No residual exposure?" Tracy asked. "None." The word carried weight. None. In late spring, Tracy returned to Westchester for the first time since leaving. Not to the Whitmore house. To a small storage unit she had rented quietly months earlier. Inside were a few personal boxes she had never moved fully into Ronald's home. Childhood photographs, letters from Edward, a framed program from her college graduation. She carried them carefully back to Manhattan. On the drive out of Westchester, she passed the familiar white-columned house from a distance. The lawn remained immaculate. The flag remained precise. But the house no longer carried gravity. It was simply architecture. She did not slow down. Back in Manhattan, Tracy opened one of her father's letters for the first time in years. It was dated nearly a decade earlier, the year he had finalized the trust. The handwriting was deliberate. Tracy, you may not understand my absences. You may resent them. But protection sometimes looks like distance. When resources grow, incentives gather. I cannot control proximity. I can structure insulation. If you are reading this, structure has activated. Trust systems, not sentiment, e.g. Tracy read the letter twice. There were no declarations of love, no apology, only instruction. She folded it carefully and placed it inside the front cover of her new notebook. The past no longer required interpretation. It required integration. That summer, the first Gordon Infrastructure Fellows were selected. 2 students from coastal Georgia, 1 from Newark, 1 from Baltimore, 1 from rural Ohio. Each received full tuition coverage and a mentorship stipend. Tracy met them via video conference. They did not know the full story behind the funding. They did not need to. She asked each one the same question. What system do you want to improve? Their answers were earnest, specific, grounded in community impact. She listened. She did not speak about wealth. She spoke about responsibility. In early July, Melissa invited Tracy to a final trust governance review. Routine, she said. Inside the conference room, Daniel presented updated performance metrics. Growth remained stable. Diversification intact. Risk exposure controlled. The structure is resilient, he concluded. Tracy nodded. So am I, she said quietly. There was no drama in the statement, just recognition. Later that evening, as the city lights flickered on across the river, Tracy walked along the promenade alone. She passed families, runners, couples arguing softly about dinner plans, ordinary lives. She did not feel separate from them. She felt aligned. Her phone vibrated once, an unknown number. She answered. Tracy, it was Ronald. She considered ending the call, then waited. I just wanted to say. He began, voice restrained. I signed the final compliance acknowledgement at my new firm. She said nothing. They required disclosure, he continued. I didn't contest it. Documentation remains, she said calmly. Yes. Silence stretched. I never hated you, he said. I know. I miscalculated. Yes. He exhaled softly. I hope you're stable. I am. Another pause. Goodbye, Tracy. Goodbye, Ronald. She ended the call. No anger, no satisfaction, just completion. She opened her notebook when she returned home. Final acknowledgement confirmed. No further contact required. She closed it. Architecture had not only held, it had matured. The trust was no longer reactive. It was directional. Separation was no longer fresh. It was integrated. And Tracy Gordon, who had once been mocked beside a hospital bed, now moved through her days without needing anyone to underestimate her. Not because she had proven them wrong, but because she no longer needed to prove anything at all. By late summer, the city no longer felt transitional. It felt chosen. Tracy had moved her belongings fully into the Manhattan apartment, though belongings remained an accurate word. She did not accumulate extravagance. She did not renovate for display. The furniture remained simple. The walls largely undecorated, except for one framed photograph of the East River taken from her father's hospital room window. She had not cropped out the reflection of medical equipment in the glass. Structure did not erase origin. The Gordon Infrastructure Fellowship had already begun to shift beyond paperwork. Daniel forwarded quarterly updates from university partners. The Georgia student had secured an internship at a port authority. The Newark fellow had proposed a municipal freight efficiency study. Systems moved quietly when funded properly. Tracy read every update, not as a benefactor seeking gratitude, as a steward monitoring alignment. One evening in August, Melissa Carter visited the apartment in person for the first time since the dissolution. They stood by the window overlooking the river. It's stable, Melissa said, referring not only to the trust. Yes, Tracy replied. You handled this without escalation. I handled it with documentation. Melissa allowed herself a faint smile. That's rarer than escalation. They reviewed final compliance reports one last time. No outstanding exposure. No pending civil filings. No cross-linked liabilities. The protective clauses Edward had embedded years ago had completed their function. Most beneficiaries never see this part, Melissa said. They react emotionally. They pursue retribution. I didn't want retribution, Tracy said. I know. After Melissa left, Tracy opened the Navy notebook, the one she had carried from the Witmore house. Its pages held dates, phrases, timestamps, carry her, relative, scale. She flipped through them slowly. There was no anger in the ink, only record. On the final blank page, she wrote closure confirmed. Then she closed the notebook permanently, not discarded, archived. The following week, she visited Ohio for the first time in years. The house she grew up in had been sold long ago, but the small town remained intact grocery store on the corner railroad tracks, running parallel to a two-lane road, modest homes built without symmetry, but with endurance. She walked past her old school, past the auditorium where her father had once missed a recital. She did not resent the memory. Absence had been part of the architecture too. At a small cafe near Main Street, an older man approached her cautiously. "You're Edward's daughter," he said. "Yes. He built things most people never saw," the man said. "That's why they lasted." Tracy nodded. "I'm beginning to understand that," she replied. When she returned to Manhattan, the river looked the same as it had the day her father died. The same as it had during mediation. The same as it had the day she signed dissolution papers. Continuity without sentiment. Her phone buzzed with a trust alert. Quarterly valuation adjustment plus 2.1%. The number meant little now. Scale no longer dictated emotion. That evening, she reviewed fellowship applications for the next cycle. One essay stood out, written by a student from a family-owned trucking company in rural Pennsylvania. The final line read, "I don't want to be wealthy. I want to build systems that don't collapse when people misunderstand them." Tracy closed the laptop gently. Misunderstanding had been the core tension all along. The Witmores had misunderstood silence as weakness. Ronald had misunderstood proximity as entitlement. Patricia had misunderstood scale as access. Edward had understood incentives. And Tracy had learned to understand structure. Weeks later, Daniel informed her that the Trust Board recommended expanding international logistics training partnerships. "Your signature is required," he said. She signed without hesitation. Not because she trusted blindly, because she understood the framework. In early autumn, she hosted a small private dinner in Manhattan. Not for investors, not for society, for the 5 Gordon Fellows and 2 faculty advisors. They gathered around her modest dining table. They spoke about port congestion, sustainable shipping fuel, municipal freight corridors. No one mentioned billions. No one asked about divorce. The conversation revolved around systems. At the end of the evening, one of the fellows lingered. "Why did you start this?" she asked quietly. Tracy considered the question. "My father believed in building insulation," she said. "I believe in building continuity." The student nodded. That night alone again, Tracy stood by the window. The city lights reflected in the river just as they had months earlier. She did not replay the hospital room scene. She did not revisit the laughter. It no longer defined the story. The laughter had revealed misjudgment. The documentation had revealed pattern. The structure had revealed outcome. And outcome did not require spectacle. Her phone vibrated once more. A final notification from Daniel: Protective Clause Archive Status Permanent. She read it once, then turned the device face down. Silence filled the apartment. Not heavy, not tense, stable. Tracy Gordon had not avenged humiliation. She had not dismantled a family publicly. She had not weaponized wealth. She had aligned with architecture. The Witmore house still stood in Westchester. Columns intact, windows symmetrical. But its assumptions had dissolved quietly. And Tracy, who had once been mocked at a bedside, now moved forward without needing to revisit that room. She turned off the light and let the city hum beyond the glass. Architecture had held, and she had walked through it without raising her voice. The truth about power is rarely loud. It doesn't arrive in speeches or dramatic confrontations. It arrives in documentation, in structure, in decisions made without spectacle. Tracy Gordon did not win because she was wealthier. She did not prevail because she humiliated anyone in return. She stood firm because she understood the difference between emotion and alignment, between reaction and architecture. Some people mistake silence for weakness. Some mistake proximity for entitlement. Some believe access is the same as ownership. But structure remembers, law records, and dignity does not need volume to endure. If this story resonated with you, if you believe quiet strength can be stronger than noise, take a moment to reflect on where you are in your own life. What systems protect you? What boundaries need structure instead of argument? If you'd like to support stories rooted in lawful justice and emotional restraint, you can like this video. Share your thoughts in the comments and tell us where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. It's grounding to remember how far these stories travel. And if you value narratives where dignity outlasts humiliation, consider subscribing. Some stories aren't about revenge. They're about alignment.